Capitol tonight. So, as you may recall, Governor Andrew Cuomo and legislative leaders have made it very clear during this budget that the plan that they came up with would be painful and not everyone was going to like it. And guess what? They were right. So joining me now to talk about what they don't like about the budget and actually maybe some things that they do like, representing groups that have had all sorts of different opinions on where the money should go. Billy Easton is the Executive Director for the Alliance for Quality Education. And then next to him, Michael Kink is the Executive Director for Strong Economy for All Coalition. Across the table, we have Mike Elmendorf. He is the President and CEO of the Associated General Contractors of New York. And next to him is E.J. McMahon, Executive Director of the Empire Center for New York State Policy. I've gotten that all out. And you're here in your new incarnation. And you're here in your new incarnation. You guys we know. All right. So let's start with the millionaire's tax because I think it's probably the most controversial. And I know exactly that you guys do not agree on it. So we'll start with the pro side of the table, and then we'll get to the con side of the table. But however, we should say it's not in the budget.
It's not in the budget, and you know, that is contrary to the wishes of 3/4 of New Yorkers. It's also, in my perspective, a pretty irrational step to say that we're going to toss $4.5 billion in annual revenues out the window when the state has such a huge fiscal crisis. So instead of asking millionaires to pay their fair share, we're going to make our school kids really take it on the chin and take dramatic cuts to their schools. It just doesn't make any sense.
Michael.
There's also interesting political consequences to the fact that it's not in. Every time something happens bad at the local level, when teachers are laid off, when arts and music are eliminated, when class size goes up, when homeless shelters fill up with more homeless kids, when kids may die because abuse and neglect programs were eliminated, we'll have the fact that lawmakers made a different decision. They chose not to tax millionaires. They chose not to restore the worst of the cuts, despite the wishes of their constituents. 3/4 of the people want it. They didn't do it. There's going to be consequences
Okay,
for that.
so this is difficult because kids are dying versus millionaires. I would not want to be on your side of the table. I mean, it's tough, right?
Well, wait a minute, though. What are we talking about here? Are we talking about a millionaire's tax? Are we talking about what the real product has been, which has been, frankly, kind of bogusly sold to the public when you see those numbers, which is a $200,000 tax, which means it's a tax.
The proposal this year was to start the threshold at $1 million.
Right, but when the polling was done, a lot of the early numbers that showed a lot of support for this, it was based on extending what was done 2 years ago, which increased taxes. It was called the millionaire's tax still, which sounds really good. It's easier to sell it. But increased taxes at $200,000 for the single filers, $250 joint filing, which meant you were getting a lot of small businesses that pay their taxes in that way.
Oh, hold on.
Capture with a higher tax
before
rate.
you there, EJ. It's going to be a free-for-all. I can already see where it's going. EJ?
Where's the ref?
Yeah, I am the ref.
Okay, good.
Okay.
I'm not sure which alleged millionaire tax increase they're talking about. I'm fairly satisfied that both of these gentlemen would want to raise taxes no matter what anyway. But I think that there is a rational reason for it not being in the budget. It doesn't raise $4.5 billion in the next fiscal year. It would raise about $1 billion in the next fiscal year.
That's still $1 billion more than schools are getting.
Right, but it's also $1 billion that the legislature has succeeded in cutting from the budget under the framework budget deal they just announced. I think it's important to balance the budget and live within your means. What we're talking about is a temporary tax increase that by itself was the biggest tax increase New York State had enacted in almost 40 years. It was temporary. It raised billions of dollars. And we're talking about the tax rate going back to what it was before this tax rate increase, which would still leave, for instance, residents of New York City paying some of the highest income taxes in the country. It has to do with economic competitiveness. There's a trade-off between economic growth and sustaining the state budget. There's also a problem with our state budget. One reason, despite having not as bad a recession as most states, that New York had a very steep revenue plunge is because we're overly dependent on high-income taxpayers for tax revenue. That's been documented. It's documented in reports by the Assembly Ways and Means majority. As long as you continue to be overly dependent on a very small number of highly mobile taxpayers with very volatile income, you're going to have problems.
Okay, now everyone's had to say. Now you can go ahead.
So, I mean, I want to just take issue with a couple of points here. First off, this is a tax cut, not a tax increase. And because this tax cut is being enacted,
It's a tax cut. It's a permanent.
No, it's a tax cut. These people are paying this tax now, and what EJ and the governor would like, and in this budget contains, is now a deli clerk making $10 an hour is in the same tax bracket as Donald Trump. That is totally unfair. Because
That's untrue.
No, it is not untrue.
That is untrue.
$20,000 income. puts you in the highest income tax bracket as an individual in the state, EJ, and you know it. And $10 an hour puts you over $20,000.
No,
yes,
it doesn't.
does.
Either you don't understand the tax code or you're deliberately
No,
misrepresenting
you're-
it. Are you
you're-
trying to
you're
say,
wrong.
wait a minute, are you trying to say that somebody in the top tax bracket, that somebody who makes $1 million a year, say, or even $500,000, pays the same percentage of income in taxes?
No, I'm talking about personal income tax, EJ.
No.
I'm
I'm
talking
talking about only. I'm talking only
I'm
about.
talking about the
I
New
know
York
that.
State personal
Here's what
income
you
tax
don't
rate.
understand. Are you telling me that somebody who's in the top tax bracket pays the same percentage of income in state income taxes as a person making $20,000 a
They
year?
both pay the 6.85%.
What
tax
is the
bracket.
effective rate
The
that they
high-end
pay?
people
You're
pay 8% of their
misrepresenting.
income in taxes, and working people pay 11% of their income in taxes.
Now, wait a minute.
They pay income taxes. They
tax
pay
rate.
sales taxes. They pay
You
Social Security
guys-
withholding.
That's different than-
All
you
of
guys
that
tie
is real
yourself
in
in the
household
knot.
budget.
Misrepresenting
Hold
this
on,
stuff.
hold on.
Who's got a
Time out.
buzzer?
Time out. Time out. What is the percentage, the PIT percentage, the rate that a person pays when they are making $40,000 a year versus $1 million a year?
Currently, the highest rate is 8.97%.
Stop. Is that true? Are you
Well,
satisfied
that's the
with
highest
that?
rate right now. Yes.
Okay, fine. Go ahead.
And it's going to go for everybody who's making over $20,000 an individual or $40,000 as a family to 6.85%.
Stop. Is that true?
Here's the answer. There's an effective tax rate. When you fill out your tax form, there's 3 factors that determine what you pay in taxes. One is your deductions, standard or itemized. The second is how many exemptions you have: self and spouse, self and children. The third and last is the tax rate. The actual percent of income that a high-income person pays in taxes under the permanent tax code, not the temporary tax hike. Permanent tax code is higher. The actual percent of taxes that a New Yorker pays in state personal income tax, if they have $500,000 in income, they're very high income, is over 6% of their income. A family of 4 making $40,000 or $50,000 a year pays less than half that much as a percentage of their income. A working family, that's a fact. And if you don't think that's true, you don't understand the tax code.
We understand
Secondly,
also, the same points that Mr. Elmendorf just made, you're not allowing that to be applied to his points. The $200,000 and $300,000 is the same with deductions. Those people make a lot of money, and the average assets for people making $500,000 a year is $3.4 million. They allege that people with $5 million in the bank aren't millionaires.
That's totally wrong on small business income.
98% of small businesses are not touched by this tax.
That's not true.
You've
That's
created a lot
totally
of smoke
untrue.
out of
Totally-
a very
let me
small
tell you-
number
let me
of
tell you
small
why it's not
businesses.
true.
Hold on,
Many
hold
of
on.
whom are the
Wait.
Koch brothers, hedge funds, special
No.
investment trusts. Those are the so-called small businesses
Not
that
true.
you're fighting for. Fair taxation, progressive taxation, that's what the people of New York want. That's what they're
Progressive
not
is
getting
higher.
in this budget.
Let me tell you why that's not true. When you look at the pool, the numbers, they say this is business income that comes in reported that's getting captured in this. You're getting in there people who have legitimate businesses, and you're getting people who decided to, sell something on eBay or sell a car, who actually decide to pay their taxes, and it's a very small number, obviously, that comes in reported as that income, but it's reported as business income. So in that pool, you've got all these people who report a teeny tiny little bit of income if they decide to actually be honest and report it, and then you've got all the legitimate businesses out there. There's 2 things to keep in mind on those businesses. The businesses that are organized in a way that pay their taxes through the personal income tax, S-corps,
Yep.
folks like that.
Yep.
That's about 75% of small businesses that are paying tax that way. If they clear that money after all their deductions and everything, and they're getting hit with the higher tax rate, it's not like it's the owner's income. It's not like they're going home at the end of the year with that money. It's the money that they use to invest in the business, to hire somebody, to buy a new piece of equipment, to increase their employees' pay, to pay health insurance premiums, the kind of stuff we should be encouraging them to do.
Hold on. First of all, we know that you guys are not going to agree on this particular point. I'm pretty sure about that. I want to shift it just for 1 second and ask you guys a question. What's being advocated for over here? Let's assume that the millionaire's tax was extended for a single year with a threshold of $1 million, because that's what the Assembly Democrats were pushing, along with the progressive side over here. Do you believe that the schools should be getting more money, that the schools are underfunded? Because the governor says that the schools are not, that they could actually all swallow the 2.7% across the board average of a reduction, and that they could also use their reserves to cover it.
It's actually 7.3 is the cut.
Okay, but the governor's number is 2.7, but just
I think the
for
governor's
argument's sake.
right. I think that all of government has to have its expenses adjusted. School aid being such a large portion of the budget, it has to be part of that. One thing the governor doesn't mention that he steered clear of saying, he implies that they should swallow the whole aid cut and take it out of administrative costs. I think that's being disingenuous. I think the elephant in the room that he doesn't want to acknowledge is what eats up the bulk of of school contracts, which is teacher compensation,
Right.
salaries, benefits, and pension contributions. That's really what primarily drives education costs. You don't spend money on education by stuffing dollars in kids' pockets. You hire teachers and you pay them more. And we've been paying them more and more and more. The average pay increase for teachers outside New York City the last 3 years was over 5%, including step increments. That's what's been driving up education costs. Now, when you take all that into account, there has to be retrenchment at the local school level. There's no question about it. It would be easier if it was true they could just like wipe it all out of administration. That would be nice. But actually, they're going to have to do some hard dealing on their teacher unions.
I think that one thing that clearly EJ and I would agree on is that the governor has been disingenuous in his representations that that the cuts can be taken out of the administration. For instance, he talked about the superintendent's salary cap, but by his estimate, that could only save $15 million in future years. The fact of the matter is that the largest cost in education is putting teachers in the classroom in front of students. And the consequence of these cuts will be dramatic cuts in the number of teachers in the classroom in front of students. That will be the actual consequence. And that's what is going to, right now we're in the sort of closing moments of an Albany budget, which for most people is a little bit of an abstraction. Once this, in the next few weeks, in the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then 6 weeks, when you have the local budgets coming out and being voted on, then what taxpayers locally are going to see is dramatic cuts in programs in their schools coupled with property tax hikes.
And the stark consequences of the fact that their local representatives may have voted against ameliorating the worst of the cuts by taxing millionaires.
Let's there we are again into taxing millionaires. Let's also another area, and we're going to run out of time, which is so sad because I could just give you guys the whole show and we'd be done. But yeah, please do. Here's the thing, though. One area that you also I think might agree on, although in a little bit of a different way, is pushing things down to the local level. You just are bringing it up by saying that by reducing the amount of spending, you then put schools in a position where they have to choose their highest expense. They have to lay off their highest expense, which is of course teachers. If, in fact, a property tax cap, which is not in the budget but might very well be, maybe, sort of, in the budget, depending on what the Senate GOP does, your concern is there's no mandate relief.
Right. I mean, I think the mandate relief they need, which is what they say they need, both in school districts and, for instance, in cities and in counties, is mandate relief that touches on collective bargaining costs. Right now, the collective bargaining rules in New York are tilted very much against the interests of taxpayers through management. We need modification of the Triborough Doctrine, a Triborough Amendment that gives teacher unions some incentive to come to the table and to talk about concessions. And we need other reforms like that. And unfortunately, the governor is not talking about things like that.
Okay, we got 90 seconds left. Go ahead, Michael.
All of this shakes down to the local level. Local schools are going to have to cut teachers, increase class size, eliminate programs. Local governments are going to have to lay off cops, firefighters, snowplow drivers. Local social services districts are cutting programs to prevent childhood abuse and neglect, to protect homeless kids. All those programs are going to be cut, and there's going to be a need for accountability. Local voters, local citizens are going to look at those cuts and say, wait a minute, is democracy working? When I told my legislators I wanted to stop the worst of this by taxing millionaires.
Then they can go in 2012 to the ballot and vote. Do you want to get the last word?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to some degree, I think the governor deserves some credit here. He's eliminated a $10 billion deficit without increasing taxes, without borrowing. He's actually reduced spending, and he's kept his focus where he said it would be, which is understanding that we're not going to tax our way out of this hole. We've got to grow our way out of this hole. And if we continue to raise taxes and continue to spend money and hope that a Brinks truck is going to show up, we're never going to get there. And the sad result of it is that years of overspending is what put us in this situation where we don't have money to invest in education, we don't have money for health care, we don't have money to invest in the infrastructure that my members build. We've got to grow if we're going to fix things, and we need to reform government across the board, as EJ was talking about, to right-size it and make it affordable for itself and for the people who pay for it, who can't afford it now.
Okay, we're out of time. It's been really a hoot, actually. We will have everyone back at some point, maybe next week. Heck, we'll make you all regulars. E.J. McMahon, thank you very much. Mike Elmendorf, thank you very much. Billy Easton, thank you. Michael King, thank you. You guys are all good sports. I appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Thanks.